Thank you all so much for sticking around. Let's please welcome Asif Kapadia to the stage. Yes.
Hi. Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you.
first of all, thank you so much for being here at Doc NYC.
It's New York. How can I say no? It's great. Thank you for coming out on Friday night. It's much warmer in here than it is out there.
It's very true. Yeah. It's really kind of a reprieve inside of here right now.
It is. It feels like Naples in here. In a good way.
Just about right. Yeah. Well, I would just love to have you start off by talking about how you got involved with Diego and his family and the experience of getting this project started.
So I have a quick question. Has anyone here seen Senna? Okay, cool. Nice, good audience here. Amy, anyone? Great. Okay, so this project came about partly because I'm a football fan. Yeah. I watch football, I play football. So I've grown up with this guy, Diego Maradona, knowing about him, seeing him during the World Cups. And when I was a student in the mid-90s back in London at the Royal College of Art, I read a book about Diego Maradona, and at the time I was still making short films, but I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great one day to make a film about Maradona? And so that idea came sort of first, the germ of it was like 1996 or something when I was a student. And then the funny thing was, because of Senna, he was a big fan of the guy, Diego Maradona, really liked the film Senna. And because when my producers were negotiating with his team, Amy went on kind of this crazy awards run, those films essentially helped us do a deal with him, because they were like, okay, he liked Senna, and the guy had won he hadn't seen Amy, but he liked the idea that he had won an Oscar and that his next film was going to be about me. It was on his Facebook page. So he didn't say it to me, but it was on his Facebook page. So we were like, that's a good sign. So that sort of like idea of growing up with him, knowing he was tricky and complex and difficult. He's alive. I didn't get to meet Amy. I didn't get to meet Senna. And I thought, if I'm going to do a third film, it's going to be a different kind of challenge, and that was the reason. He's going to be really tricky to make a film about. That's the reason to make the film about him.
Well, and really with all three of these films, there's this element of tragedy within all of these stories. I mean, did you know going in where you were going to end up with the end of this film? I mean, for me, I grew up with Maradona the legend, like the myth of this incredible soccer player, the hand that touched God, things like that. But coming back to the full circle of where he is now, we really see the tragedy of his story.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting one, because with Senna, we almost tried to do as much as we could of his life, and with Amy, because both of them, sadly, tragically, had very short lives. Maradona's still going. He'll do something now that you can make a film about yesterday, and tomorrow. So one of the funny things was, when I was doing the interviews with people and doing the research, my interviews would always end with saying, when does the film end? Because I can't figure out where do we, and they'd all be like, good luck, because they've written books about him, and the minute they send the book to the publisher, he'll do something tomorrow that makes it out of date. So we realized that we had to kind of, I needed to make it future-proof, but I also realized as we were going along that the bit that people don't know is Naples. That they know the World Cups, and they don't really know what happened in between. And so the idea of telling the story, focusing on Napoli, the interesting thing is, the opening, the car chase, the kind of French Connection bit, that in an earlier cut was like 45 minutes, where we went in detail through everything that happened up until he got to Naples. And then after he left Napoli, it was like half an hour of what happened to him subsequently, but it just was always too long, and we had to kind of make a tough decision. And that's when we decided to focus on Napoli, because really that's the big story of where he becomes the best player in the world, where he wins the World Cup, he wins the championships, he kind of has a hard time, but all of his personal problems start there. Everything that he is now is because of what happened there. The legend is because of Naples. And that ended up being the kind of centerpiece of the movie. And everything at the beginning ended up being like, summed up into a rush to get there. And everything afterwards is like this kind of slightly more poetic way of saying this is what happens afterwards.
Well, and it's not necessarily always a great portrait of Maradona. Like, he doesn't always come off well. Did you find that it was challenging to get him to open up about the darker sides of who he was?
Yeah, so the key thing, one of the deals when we were doing the negotiation was that my producers sort of did an agreement where I would get 9 hours of interviews with Diego Maradona, which at the time I thought that's not a lot, because on Amy, it wasn't unusual for me to do a 5-hour interview with somebody and go back and do another 5-hour interview. And often you talk for 5 hours, but it's the last 20 minutes I might use, or bits of the last 20 minutes. In this case, it was 3 times 3-hour interviews. Okay, fine, we'll try. I had no idea what state he would be in. I didn't know if he'd remember anything. I didn't know if he'd be friendly. I didn't know if he'd attack me if I asked a question he didn't like. There's a real myth about this guy. You don't know what you're dealing with. I live in London. We're editing in London. Diego lives in Dubai, so we had to go to Dubai to interview him. The story takes place in Napoli, in Naples. Most of the people he interviewed were living in Buenos Aires. So this was like a crazy bit of traveling to get it all together and put it together. So I went out to Dubai and I met him. In the end, I've kind of interviewed Diego about 4 or 5 times now. Met him 4 or 5 times. His attention span is about 90 minutes, funnily enough. So he gets tired and gets bored, and then it's over. So I think it's over. We should leave. Can I come back tomorrow? And if it went well, he'd be like, no. And if it went well, then he'd be like, yeah, come back tomorrow, and we'd carry on. And we kind of started building up a kind of relationship of some form. The first time I interviewed him, he was watching TV while I was interviewing him with the sound on. That was the starting point. I was like, this is weird. And he's watching football, obviously, on TV while I was trying to interview him. He went to the restroom, and when he went to the restroom, I muted the TV. I thought, let's see if he noticed. He didn't care. He carried on. So I had to sort of record that interview myself. And then gradually, as we went along, I was able to bring another member of crew. And it was all going cool. It was going well. And one of the first interviews, I asked him about his ex-wife, Claudia, who's a big part of his life. And I thought, that's an easy question. And of course, straight away, he goes, don't bring her up. I never want to hear her name ever again. I'm like, okay, cross that out. The reason a lot of the footage exists is because Diego's first agent hired 2 Argentinian cameramen to film him. So a lot of that footage, behind the scenes, on the pitch, all of that was shot by 2 cameramen hired to tell the story of Diego Maradona. And they started working in 1981, and they followed him when he went from Boca Juniors in Argentina to Barcelona. That's why we have the operation when they're cutting him open. That was his own cameraman filming that. I've got it in gruesome detail if you want to see that ever. They followed him to Naples. All of this stuff existed. So to get that, I thought I'd ask him about the agent who did it. And of course, I said, Jorge, your agent, tell me about this guy. He goes, don't bring him up. He stole from me. So whenever I brought anyone up, it would be I don't want to hear from them. And his whole thing is, you're making a film about me. You should just talk to me about me. I don't want to talk to anyone about anyone else. So the only way to get him to open up was to talk about his mum. That's a good starting point always. Talk about his mum, talk about his sisters. And then he kind of relaxed a bit and we got somewhere. I saved up the tough ones about illegitimate, kind of the children he didn't recognize, cocaine, the Camorra. Let's just say that saved up to interview number 5. Because I knew this is probably going to be the last time I get in there with him, and that's when we went through all of the other stuff. The kind of typical week in the day in the life of Maradona, how when he was playing, and Monday we'd do this, on Tuesday we'd do that. That was all from that last interview, where I remember thinking, I've never heard him talking like this before. We'd go out, we'd party, we'd do this, and then I'd run and sweat it off, and then I'd play again and win the championship and be the best player in the world. It's mad.
All right, I'd love to open it up to the audience. Yes, right here in the front.
First of all, thank you for being in New York. I remember I follow your Instagram. And
How do you put it together? I mean, what I do on our films is there's a lot of research. There's a lot of prep. Almost a year on these films of just finding out who's who and where is their material and trying to get footage, whatever it is, everything. I want to see anything. Cast the net really wide. So we have an edit suite and we get as much material, because for me it's got to somehow end up, it's a movie. So you've got to show the story. We've got to find a way to tell the story with images. So we've got to get all of the images and then start doing interviews and research interviews. And most of those I do, pretty much all of mine, are audio interviews only. I don't take a camera. And we just start talking to people to find out who was there, who knew him. And before I speak to him, I want to know, in a way, what to talk to him about, because I knew I had a restricted amount of time. So we start editing, we do research, we're looking for archive, all at the same time. And I drive everyone crazy because I don't say it's about this. There's no script, there's no document, there's no treatment. It's let's just research the story. And then I kind of have whiteboards, and I look at that up on the wall, and I'm thinking, there's a lot that happened here, a lot that happened here, a lot that happened here, and that feels like those will become the acts of the story. And then only after about a year and a half, 2 years, does the editor, Chris King, come on board. So up until then, it's me and an assistant editor maybe, and then Chris comes in when we've got enough material. Chris was the editor, one of the editors on Senna. He cut Amy, and he did this. So then he starts to really chop it up and be tough on the material. And while he's editing, I'm looking forwards always. Who's the next person to interview? What do we do to the next trip to Argentina? What are we missing? And trying to structure it in like a fiction film is the aim. To make it feel like a movie, even though it's a doc, and somehow the kind of using the techniques of drama and setting up a character, setting up, for example, the Kimura, then they go away, and then they come back, and they go away, and then you think this is not going to end well. And then, just having that kind of vibe of... Senna, for me, was like a spiritual action film genre, and Amy was a kind of tragic love story musical, and this was always felt a bit like a kind of early Scorsese film or something, These are street guys, and he's a street guy who happened to play soccer, and he played football the way he lives, which is like cheating, brilliant, and a bit of cheating. That's the way he lives. That's his life, So that was the idea.
Hey, we got time for a couple more. Yes.
Do you think it could have been different, as in if he'd gone somewhere else? Or? It's a good question. I think that was like always probably going to be wherever he goes. There's a thing where he wanted to leave Naples, and he couldn't go because the team owned him. They had a contract. They own him. But where he wanted to go was to Marseille. Now, if you know anything about Marseille, everything you can get in Naples, you can get in Marseille. When I was interviewing him, he was living in Dubai. And then when I wanted to show him the rough cut of the film just before we finished it, he left. And where did he end up? In Sinaloa, right, in Mexico. So the guy is drawn to certain places in the world, right, run by certain types of people, let's just say. So I think that's just who he is. He comes from the street, and he's going to go to those places. And I think the minute he became famous, the minute for me, the turning point in the film, if you look at his face, is when he wins the World Cup and he's holding it and they're jostling him in the airport and he arrives back in Argentina. And everything before that feels like a version, for me, of Diego. And everything after that, he's changed. And it's really interesting. I didn't think the film would turn out like this, but it's very similar to Amy. Before she became famous, and then she does Back to Black, and then the light's gone in her eyes at some point when she just it's about to go over the edge, and the boyfriend comes back in her life and everything changes and she's different. For me, you win the World Cup for Argentina, you come back to Naples, you win that championship, you can't go back to Diego. I don't know if it's possible. That's what I would say.
All right, we got time for one more.
Any more? While
Yeah, we can do one more after that. That was a short one.
Extra time. It's a good question. How did we kind of decide to show the football? The challenge of football and making films about football is there's 22 players on a really big field and a referee, and the cameras are really far away. Now you have like maybe 20 cameras or 15 cameras, really long lenses that you can show close-ups and everything. But in this time, when he was playing, if you were watching football on television in Italy, it was one wide-angle shot from the top of the stadium, right? And it's just dots running around. You wouldn't even know which one was Maradona. So that was one of the challenges, is like, how are we going to tell this story? It's not like Senna when we're in the car and you're with him, you are him. With Amy, you're going to have a single person on stage. So that was a worry. And then this footage that these two Argentinian cameramen shot, we got hold of it, and we decided, actually, we don't care about what happens in the whole match. We don't care about if the score finished 3-1. We're not going to show every goal. And it became a kind of rule of saying, how little can you show of a game? And in the end, it might just be one move that he does, or one goal, or one assist, or something like that, and trying to reduce it down. Because the scary thing is always when you do film like this, when is there too much bloody football? And my wife will come in and say, "It's been too much football." I said, "Man, it's really boring." And you're like trying to, and then everyone else is like, "There's not enough football. He's a footballer. You've got to put him on football." So that argument I'm having with myself of how much do you put in, how much do you take out, and how much you just focus on him. And it became just about showing him. And actually, I think the World Cup final is the only time when we go through the goals, you know, where they score 2, the Germans score 2, and then they come back again. But other than that, we never go through a whole match and tried not, I don't know how it plays for you guys, but tried not to make it like a highlights package. And hopefully the intention is always to somehow, everything is there because it's sort of motivating his character. Every scene has to somehow move the story forward. Something happens that takes it on character-wise to the next stage.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but I want to thank you so much for being here, and thank you guys all so much for sticking around.
Thank you.
Yeah, and enjoy the rest of your time at Dock NYC.
Thank you.